Well, hi everyone. I'm continuing my series of stories related to the Washington Bridge, in particular to the trove of data that has been released to many people in the media, according to the source that provided this information to me from what's going on in Rhode Island. And so far, I'm not seeing a lot of coverage besides this channel and a few other places, certainly not the TV stations there. Have I seen much follow on from the initial story about the April 5th, 2024 draft forensic report. So as I mentioned, I have access to this trove of data. I've been going through it. It's been a really tedious and slow process. I'm covering emails and text documents that to me indicate very strongly the potential for undue influence attempts and undue interference from Rhode Island state government officials in the conduct of this forensic evaluation of what led to the emergency closure of the Washington Bridge. So I'm going to go over all that information here today. So let's go over the key players. You already likely know them already, but we have Rhode Island Governor Dan McKee. We have Rhode Island DOT Director Peter Alviti. We have State Bridge Engineer John Price. And we have Michael Brown, who headed up this evaluation effort, this forensic evaluation for WJE. Now, as I mentioned, I've been waiting for other media outlets to cover the details of this data trove. And I was surprised this weekend that the only stories related to the Washington Bridge were rather breezy coverage, I would say, of the structural health monitoring system for the existing eastbound bridge. It's now carrying 6 lanes of traffic. And these stories, they were in multiple TV station outlets that said, oh, Rhode Island DOT says everything's great with the eastbound Washington Bridge. Okay, well, there's a lot more to this structural health monitoring system. I've been working on a story for the last, I'd say 3 months. I've slowly gotten responses to my APRA requests. And I can tell you there's a lot more to this story, but I'll cover that in a future video. So again, I'm delving into the background of what led to the preparation of this draft April 5th, 2024 forensic report. And one of the key aspects of this report was to evaluate what caused the failure of these post-tension tie-down rods for the unbalanced cantilever beams on the bridge. And these are the rods that we're talking about. Now, Governor Dan McKee, in the very beginning, in December 2023, immediately after the closure of this bridge, indicated that he was going to commission an independent evaluation about what happened. A quote from this news article here. Rhode Island Department of Administration announced late Monday afternoon that, at the direction of Governor Dan McKee, the state will now hire a contractor to, quote, provide independent oversight and review of the Washington Bridge forensic analysis for the Department of Transportation. And I know going from these documents, you see various emails where the Department of Administration is in fact working to get WJE under contract to do this work. So we first got insight into what was in this draft forensic report from the initial releases from what's going on in Rhode Island. And then on September 26, 2025, the Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Norona released this draft report to his website. And it was the same report. Actually, I had a copy of this draft report from my source, and it was the same one that the Attorney General posted on his website a few days later. And what was odd about that forensic report, in my opinion, was there was no details associated with the metallurgical evaluation of those steel post-tension rods. And instead, we find these segments, these disembodied portions of what appear to be emails between WJE and RiDOT bridge engineer John Price and back and forth. And by the way, from this trove of data, there are numerous files, and the information I'm presenting here come from a folder called text. And in that folder are various numbered documents. And so rather than cite each one here in this video, I'll put the number of that file name in the description of this video so that those of you in local media who have access to this trove of data can follow along and verify it for yourself. But we know that there was a separate memo on the metallurgical evaluation for some reason. I didn't understand why it wasn't part of the forensic report proper. But the key finding here that jumped out at me, as I mentioned in previous videos, is that WJE states that clearly the anchor rod was broken well before the most recent inspection in July of 2023 that predated the discovery of the broken rod in December of 2023. As everyone's seen pictures of those tie-down rods, they were highly corroded, and WJE references two main potential sources of that corrosion: de-icing salts, when they salt the bridge deck in the winter to help snow and ice melt, but also there was some concern about the potential of seawater spray. Actually, the Seekonk River there is brackish, but that was one source of salt to the bridge that they were looking at. By the way, in this same email, I'll reference this here. In discussing the findings of our investigation with the client this morning, they noted there's a separate parallel structure, age not yet known, that is fabricated with weathering steel. So they're talking about the eastbound Washington Bridge, Bridge 200. The bridge is carrying 6 lanes of traffic now. In response to our indication of potential seawater spray exposure on the bridge in our report, they ask what the implications might be for the adjacent weathering steel structure and how it could be evaluated. So we know from having access to previous inspection reports for the eastbound bridge, there were a number of steel structural elements, girders, that had flaking of the steel due to corrosion. So that appears to be part of their scope, is to look at the potential impacts to such corrosion to the eastbound bridge. But I don't want to get too deep into that right now. That'll be a future video. All right, so I'm going to show you a series of documents that I got from this trove. This appears to me to be an exchange internally with WJE for incorporation of various comments into the draft forensic report that was ultimately issued on April 5th, 2024. And I've circled this main area here. I assume that this is in the scope John Price asked for directly. John Price with Rhode Island DOT. And look at this line here. Would leave this out. This politician is not an engineer and has little basis to make this determination. All right, well, like I said, that's a circumstantial indication that they're referring to somebody at RiDOT. I think WJE, this Michael Brown, I would expect him to be subpoenaed if there is a hearing with the state legislature in Rhode Island relative to the Washington Bridge fiasco. And I would certainly, if that happened, ask him what type of influence does he think Rhode Island government officials tried to exert in the preparation of his evaluation report. There are many other questions I would ask him, but I'd also ask him, who are they referring to as this politician is not an engineer and has little basis to make this determination? I mean, I think that's rather curious. Now, RiDOT Director Peter Alviti has stated on more than one occasion that he's taken a hands-off approach relative to the preparation of these supposedly independent evaluations as to what happened with the Washington Bridge. And here's an email from John Price of RiDOT to Michael Brown with WJE. Hi, Michael. Can you please send me a preliminary schedule that has major milestones? The RiDOT director is looking for a general timetable to report to the governor. Any information you would have would be appreciated. Thanks, John. Okay. Well, I don't take issue with the director of the DOT wanting to know the timeline for a study, if it just stopped there. So here we have an email from Michael Brown with WJE to this John Coca. He was involved with sampling of the post-tension rod in early January 2024 at the bridge site. John, while meeting with Mr. Price, the RiDOT director, Mr. Alviti, and the RiDOT chief engineer, Mr. Rocchio, about the Washington Bridge 700 PT rod evaluation, they noted our recent memo indicated potential sea spray exposure. Okay, so they're talking about the anchor rods, and it's not clear exactly when that meeting was held, but from this email, it was dated at a time when the metallurgical report had been provided to RiDOT, but before the April 5th, 2024 draft of the forensic report had been issued. Now, at the time that WJE provided the metallurgical report to Rhode Island DOT's John Price. I think there was some drafts floating around April 15th, April 16th, 2024. And then they got this metallurgical report to RiDOT on February 19th, 2024. And WJE clearly expected that this report was going to be made public. And you can see here, this is an email from WJE's Michael Brown on February 20th, 2024. And he's talking to his chief metallurgist, Robert Warkey. He says, "I issued the report yesterday. Please be aware that any of us may be contacted by the media about this report when it's released. Please inform me if that occurs." And his metallurgist says, "Will do. I assume you're saying to inform you without speaking to them." And Michael Brown says, "That would be preferable. I'd like to be sure any statements we make are coordinated." And here's an email exchange going back to January of 2024. And Michael Brown is emailing his metallurgist at WJE saying, "Robert, thank you for keeping me in the loop. Our client, Mr. Price of RiDOT, has asked me to provide a daily update of progress in our investigation. To that end, I'd like for you to also give me updates on your portion of the investigation. This could be just a short email summary of items underway and completed and any interim findings. Would an update before noon each day be reasonable?" But the metallurgist says, "You're very welcome. I don't think I've ever had a client ask for daily updates, but I can send you one by 4 p.m. Eastern time." And I can tell you, I've been involved with providing expert testimony, expert opinion, and I've never heard of a case where the client expected daily updates. And Michael Brown references why this is. He says, "Yes, this is a politically charged scenario, and they are under significant pressure from the administration and the legislature." But again, circumstantially anyway, it indicates to me the potential that RiDOT is trying to control the narrative. I mean, it's one thing to understand what's going to be in the report so you can prepare your staff or just your own thinking in terms of how you're going to respond. But I think there's indications that it may have gone beyond that with RiDOT. Now, here's another email. This is early on. This is just a week or two after WJE was contacted by Rhode Island DOTs to do this forensic evaluation. And this is from Michael Brown with WJE to this John Coca, who ended up going out there to sample the post-tension rod. "Gents, update on the Westbound Washington Bridge. I just got off a call with John Price, RiDOT, in which we are asked to brief a representative from the Rhode Island Department of Administration, Rebecca Weber. They have engaged a firm, McNary, Bergeron, and Johansson, MBJ, to independently review activities related to the bridge. Firm principals Jeff Maley and Jim Bergeron were on the call. They were given an overview of the situation with the bridge and WJE's role. Their role is not 100% clear, but it seems they will be peer reviewing our review on behalf of the administration and assisting it in developing any technical talking points going forward." Okay, you can make of that what you will, but if you are hiring a firm to perform a forensic evaluation, why do you need another firm bird dogging them, if so to speak? But this is interesting. "These folks are construction specialists and familiar with complex bridges and are often called on to troubleshoot construction issues. From what I gathered, they do not regularly perform bridge safety inspections, maintenance, testing, or forensic investigations. They were apparently referred to the administration through a contact in Nebraska. That's all I know." All right, this is just an email showing them wrapping up the draft of the metallurgical report in mid-February 2024. Because Rhode Island DOT need to move so quickly, and apparently they hadn't worked with WJE, at least not in a very long time, it appears that Rhode Island DOT reached out to Michael Baker International, and I'm guessing that's because they apparently had a contract, an existing contract with them. And that's pretty common for DOTs to have what they call on-call contract. If something comes up, they can act quickly because administratively it takes time to get these contracts in place. So they were instructed, they being Michael Baker International, to bring WJE in and just handle their fees as an expense to RiDOT. What's ironic is Michael Baker International was named in a lawsuit just a few months later after these studies were performed, along with 12 other firms who had been involved with the Washington Bridge. So I guess you could file that under no good deed goes unpunished. So if you look at these documents in this trove here, it would seem that WJE was likely disappointed that Rhode Island government officials decided to keep these reports secret, the metallurgical report and the draft forensic report. And they did keep it secret from the public, despite what the governor says and what Director Alviti says. I mean, I'll throw up the definition of hiding something here. And it applies very much so to this situation. Now, they may have had a reason to hide this report from the public in that they said it was related to the lawsuit. You know, you take it at face value, that could be a legitimate reason, even though I think the lawsuit's bogus and just designed to provide political cover. But be that as it may, there's a difference between saying, hey, we didn't hide anything, to saying, yeah, we hid it from the public because we were trying to keep it out of the public eye to preserve our case. But they don't say that. But, you know, WJE was looking forward to this report being made public and was hoping there would be indirect marketing opportunities, which any firm would reasonably hope to have happen. Now, I'm going to play this quick segment here. This is an excerpt from one of these Ask the DOT director. This is from October 2nd, 2025. By the way, I'm recording this video on October 13th, 2025. And this is the Valicente show. I would not call that DOT segment news at all. But what's interesting is it's a really friendly environment, in my opinion, relative to Peter Alviti. He gets really comfortable. He's not asked very pointed questions. Certainly there aren't intensive follow-ups. And he skates a lot of things, in my opinion, that most journalists, I think, would try and pin him down on. And I don't know why that isn't the case here. But that's my take on it.
There are a bunch of big lies or inaccuracies or whatever you want to call them that are being spread about this whole thing. And I think the governor and the attorney general in the last 2 days dispelled a good number of them and exposed them as being lies. The first was, you know, we were holding this forensic report a secret. There are various people that were saying we held it a secret. We kept it a secret because it said something bad about us and we didn't want it known, yada, yada, yada. Well, I think the attorney general set that record straight yesterday, right? He was on your show. He set the record straight.
Yes, it was actually the day before.
He said, we were instructed by him and his attorneys not to talk about the contents of the report or any other matters involving the defense. There's over $100 million at stake here, $100 million that will go to the taxpayers of the state of Rhode Island so that we can build more bridges with it, and rightfully so. And it's justified because people that we relied on to make decisions gave us the wrong information. Period, end of story. And we're not holding anything back. We're not keeping things secret. We're doing what our attorneys told us to do, preserve the case so that the case for the people of the state of Rhode Island will have a positive outcome. I've got a lot of faith in that.
Okay, well, we already mentioned the hiding thing. I mean, clearly that report has been hidden for a year and a half. They may have had their reasons, but for them to say it wasn't hidden is not correct. Also, there's a narrative being put out there by the DOT director and the governor of Rhode Island saying, hey, anybody who's talking about this is jeopardizing our $100+ million judgment that we're going to win against these people. And they've also said that, you know, people who are trying to figure out what's been going on behind the scenes with the Washington Bridge are, it's because they have an agenda and they're saying things that aren't correct and so on. Well, they should have made this report public. You know, somebody wouldn't have to leak something that should have been made public. One of the things they talk about is, hey, there's people with this agenda that want to try this in the media, try this case. You can hear from Director Alviti. He's trying to try the case already. He's stating as if it's a foregone conclusion that all these consultants and contractors were in the wrong. They owe the state or will hundreds of millions of dollars or in excess of $100 million. And, you know, they can talk about the case, but when you try to ask any details, then that's when they clam up and say, oh, well, we got this lawsuit. And, oh, by the way, we don't want anybody else talking about it because they're the ones that are jeopardizing the case. So I don't know. It's pretty interesting. So there'll be a lot more information to come here. I really hope that the local media there isn't intimidated by the governor in particular, trying to suggest that anybody that talks about this information that's been released by the Attorney General of Rhode Island is jeopardizing the case, has an agenda. I hope that doesn't intimidate in any fashion local media from covering this story as I think it should be covered. With that, I want to send a shout out to those of you who have contributed to Buy Me a Coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to thank the channel members, and certainly I want to thank those of you who've contributed to Super Thanks. So stay tuned, everyone.